So much for that championship standard Kevin O'Connell talked about before the 2023 season. Where did the Vikings go wrong? And can they do anything about it? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that? 3, 1, 2, 3. You like it?
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to those of you who listen to this show every single day. My hashtag everydayers, I love hearing from you. Sound off in the comments or on Twitter or wherever you can. For those of you who are new, welcome. Hello, my name is Luke. I'll be your host. You can find this show wherever you find your favorite podcasts, whether it is an audio listening place like the SiriusXM app. You can also go to SiriusXM and search out Vikings. You can find live broadcasts of all of the Vikings games. You can also search out like Timberwolves, get Timberwolves games and stuff. Find all that on SiriusXM. You can also find the show on YouTube and Amazon Fire and Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. It's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. It's Twitter Tuesday today, which means I'm answering your questions. You can send me questions whenever you want via DM on Twitter if you want, or you can send an email to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. I recommend against the Twitter DMs. They get buried sometimes. If I get one on like a Wednesday, I'll try to remember, but I won't always. So send an email, fill out the Google form in the show notes, or just wait until I put out a call on Twitter on Monday mornings. As for this week's, the first question I am going to answer here comes from Rob Meek, who says, I agree that the team has holes and prioritize balanced books over investments. How much future capital would you like to see the team use this offseason? So I don't know if I said that. That is a take that I talked about a lot on Twitter. I don't know if I talked about it here. So let me just relay it for you or recap it if I have said it, but I don't think I have. So in the offseason, I sort of lukewarm disagreed with a lot of stuff because I wanted to give things a chance to play out, right? But my take was basically, it kind of seems like they're prioritizing cap health over like having a good team, right? Things like taking the entirety of Adam Thielen's dead cap hit, all $13.5 million of the dead cap that they took for cutting his contract at once when they could have spread it out over 2 years by designating him post-June. I thought he was one where it made sense to designate him post-June. And spread that out a little bit so you could be a little more serious this year and have a little bit more cap space for kind of depth pieces and the sort of second and third layers of the roster that I feel like didn't quite get enough attention. And also things like trading away Ezra Cleveland in the middle of the season. Things like trading away Zadarius Smith. The Vikings amassed a lot of 5th and 6th round picks for like true blue starters that then got replaced by worse players. Marcus Davenport, Dalton Reisner, they were not better than the people they replaced. So the Vikings kind of got worse to get assets a little bit, and I had some problem with that. It seemed like they really, especially with salary cap, they really wanted it to not feel constrained when the Vikings with Rick Spielman made a habit of year after, for like 8 years, that you looked at this salary cap situation and thought it was hell, and then they would sign, 3 good free agents and figure everybody out and get 3 extensions done. And you're like, okay, well, I guess that was like actually fine. And it seems like the Vikings decided, all right, now we're going to take our medicine and, get out from under these bad salary cap things. And as a result, they had a very top heavy roster and had to take a lot of risks on their roster, like with Marcus Davenport. So how much future capital would you like to see the team use this offseason? The answer to that is however much they need, but they have a lot, right? They've got 37, I think, million is their projection on over the cap for 2023. That's just base what they have. And then they have 139 million slated for 2025. So for this year, it was 24, they have 37 million. So for 2024, they are pretty much set up to, get a couple free agents, get the extensions done they want to do. Like maybe a lot of that goes to a quarterback or whatever. But if they use cap for 25 and 26, they basically have no commitments. Then they have tons and tons and tons to work with. So they got money. money is not going to be, cap's not going to be an issue at all. Yeah, they might have to borrow from future years a little bit if they want to like do a lot of stuff, but like that might be a good idea. You might want them to do a lot of stuff. They've got a lot of stuff to do. So it's whatever they need. I think honestly, there's a bit of a blank check that they can have for this offseason. They got a lot of needs coming up, right? They have their quarterback is scheduled to walk. They aren't going to have any edge rushers under contract. Patrick Jones will be the only one under contract. And then like, free agent, undrafted like rookies, like Andre Carter. Benton Whitley, baby. They are going to lose all their tackles except for Harrison Phillips. They're going to lose Jordan Hicks. Like there's a lot of players walking, so there's going to be a lot of material to replace. They got a lot to do, and $37 million is not going to be enough to do it. They'll have to borrow from future years, and they can because they've got a ton in 2025. So yeah, borrow away, go crazy. Viking side says, saw your posts last night after the game. My question is, are you done with KOC and Kwesi already? I wanted to get out in front of this. So if you follow me on Twitter, which you shouldn't, I went pretty hard during the game at the Vikings and their failures. And I'm going to be honest, I was cooking. I didn't, there were no lies. Show me the lie. But basically the critiques boiled down to, heavily emotional and in the moment, the Vikings didn't take 2023 seriously enough. They failed to solve the issues that plagued them all year, and they failed to adapt to the changing circumstances as they dealt with the quarterback carousel. You expect some decline in quality, but I think they did a bad job managing that. I think they made that worse than it had to be. Maybe that's a way to put it. Am I done with KOC and Kwesi? No. This is why I say this a lot, and I want to really drive it home because it drives me nuts. You can criticize someone without calling for their job. You don't have to do the two things at once. You can do just the one thing. You can just say, "Hey, I think that was a bad decision that you made. Do it do it better next time." You don't have to say, "I think that was a bad decision that you made, and you should be fired." Like, you don't have to do that. That's a nuclear option. Now, if we want to talk about whether or not Kevin O'Connell should be fired, the question has to be, do you trust him to field a good team with maybe better circumstances? Because the Vikings were fairly unlucky in 2023. If you expect that to be average luck, which seems like a reasonable way to go about like decision making, then, do you trust Kevin O'Connell and the direction overall broad strokes that he's taking the team? And it's like, well, I don't know. It's only been 2 years. The only way that I would advocate for firing a guy after 2 years is if it is like an abject disaster and they've won 2 games in 2 years. But I don't know, man. They're going to be what, 7-10, 8-9 after a 13-4 season? Yeah, you get a little leash on that. I think that'd be way too reactionary. And it's doubly so for Kwesi. With GMs, do not fire GMs after 2 years. It's just not a thing that happens. And it's a really bad idea. And you don't have to think about it for very long to figure out why. Shadow says the draft pick keeps getting better. Should we trade the house for a top QB prospect and extend Daniil, JJ, and Darisaw? Tough not getting Kirk back, but this sets up long-term, it seems. I think that or Kirk are the two options. Here's the deal. Like, for the money reasons that I explained before, you can extend those 3 players and bring back Kirk or like get another quarterback somehow if that costs money. All of that stuff is possible. You can absolutely do all of those things. It is not even hard. So you don't have to choose between those things. Money is not going to be a limiting factor here. They sacrificed. This is my take. They sacrificed competitiveness in 2023 so that money would not be an issue in 2024 and 2025. So if they approach that offseason by saying, we don't have the cap really for it, then we all get to be really mad because what did you just make us sit through that Packers game for? That's just like that was the cost. Now let's see the benefit. That said, this is like the operative question of the offseason, right? If you, let's just say Daniil, JJ, and Darisaw, you want to extend all those, and let's just set that aside and say, okay, we're going to extend those, but do we get a rookie or do we get Kirk? Ain't that the $1 million question? Again, that's something that I'm not going to just like breeze by in a Twitter Tuesday. Jordan asks, why can't we just be normal? Man, that is pretty normal. I don't know. You got your doors blown off by a better team once you hit a critical mass of injury, and didn't prepare for it very well. Like, it's normal to lose games, man. Yeah, it's 7-10. There's like 5, 7-9 teams. I think that this is stuff that does happen to every team from time to time. It's not particularly unique to the Vikings. Got a whole bunch more questions, and I want to make sure that I get to them. So we'll try to quicken things up here as we move along. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you are interested in getting into a little bit of gambling this year, maybe a new law just kicked in wherever you live or something like that, and you can get into it, head on over to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. They've got a special deal going on right now where you can get $150 in bonus bets for laying down any $5 bet. Win or lose, you just have to bet it. So you can go bet it on something that's, minus 1,500 or something like that is as likely as possible to hit, or you can bet it on something crazy if you want. It doesn't matter if you win or lose, you get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed just for signing up at FanDuel.com/LockedOn. You can find all kinds of stuff: spreads, over-unders, parlays, touchdown props, individual player props, all sports, all everything. Go explore that website and check back every once in a while because they have all kinds of really cool promos going on all the time. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn, official partner of the NFL. Moving on with this Twitter Tuesday episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Thanks again for those of you who listen to this show every single day. This would not be possible without you. For your next listen, why don't you check out the 24/7 Locked On Minnesota Sports live YouTube stream. There's nothing like it anywhere else. A live stream of daily podcasts about all things Minnesota sports, from the Vikings and my shows on there to Timberwolves Wild, Locked On Minnesota Sports, like roundtables and stuff, all kinds of great stuff. Just flick that thing on and forget about it in the background, and that will make your workday go by just that much quicker. Moving on with this Twitter Tuesday episode. Next one comes from Tyler, who says, is it fair to say that with a healthy Hawkinson, some of the ugliness from Hall's game would have been cleaned up? I think of 2 reps that were like visibly affected by Johnny Munt. One was the interception, where it was behind him and he couldn't bring it in. I think that is a route that's supposed to sit. So here's the rub. I don't have the tape yet as of this recording. I usually can get my hands on it on like Monday morning, Monday afternoon, and I can watch it before I do this so I can answer these questions better. I don't have it yet, so I'm going to come back to that tomorrow after really being able to look at it. But on my live eye, it looked like that was supposed to be a route that sits versus zone coverage, and Munt ran through it, and then the ball was behind him. Could have just been a bad throw too. I don't know. But sure, yeah, TJ Hawkinson never failed to catch difficult passes, so that definitely would have been fine. SR Smith says, why are you a Hall apologist? Plays were there and he missed them. I'm going to be honest. I don't think SR Smith listened to the show yesterday. He might be just talking about that on Twitter, which I didn't have a lot to say about Hall on Twitter because I couldn't really see it live. I couldn't really see what was going on. So I couldn't really put together an opinion. I don't really know what you're reacting to there, but on yesterday's show, I was pretty careful to not be an apologist, to say like, no, he definitely claims his piece of this, but there's more going on. The issues with the offense did not start and end with one person. They rarely do. It's a naive outlook. And I suggest that you think a little bit harder about it, or, listen to the show that you're responding to. Sad Viking Sad says, what are the actual and realistic chances that JJ just decides to walk from us? That sure is a sad Viking question. There is this nagging fear that every wide receiver is going to be like the last wide receiver. That's just a stereotype. You are stereotyping a wide receiver. There is no other explanation for this. Every single time that a beat reporter has seriously engaged with the question of whether or not Justin Jefferson is happy in Minnesota, they've all said, like, he has a great attitude. He loves it here. He never complains. He's always just happy-go-lucky. Everybody loves working with him. And the reason that a contract is not signed yet is because the Vikings wanted to play hardball with him, which I don't really agree with, but I don't know what the contract was that they turned down. But like Justin Jefferson was the last person to submit, or his camp submitted the last contract offer before they decided to table negotiations till after the season. He went, I will play for you for however many years on this deal. So I don't think that that's changed a lot. In the like philosophical, the like Cartesian, we don't know what we don't know kind of sense, Sure, I guess it's possible because you can't predict the future. If you could, Vegas wouldn't make any money, right? I say that all the time. But realistic chances, I don't know. Same chances the Vikings drafting any particular player, or chances that Russell Wilson becomes a Viking, or chances that, I don't know. Same baseline chance that anything has to happen in the NFL. Everything has some shot to happen until it doesn't, right? But there is not really any actual evidence that there is any danger of that right now. If there is, then we'll talk about it when it comes up, but none has come up. So really, it's just whatever you're scared about because of what happened with other wide receivers, and you probably shouldn't stereotype as much. Mark D says, do you think the Vikings should dedicate more money to the position of backup quarterback, considering the way this year has gone? I don't know if you can do better at backup quarterback, honestly. They're backups for a reason, and we've seen a lot of backups play, and a lot of them have had their Josh Dobbs mania moments and then fallen apart. But they spent quite a bit. I mean, they traded for one. They had traded for Mullins last year, so they've traded for backup quarterbacks 2 years in a row now, which I hadn't actually thought about before now. Honestly, I don't hate Mullins as a backup because he's not supposed to be the starter for 9 weeks. The backup quarterback position isn't really meant to buoy the team for 9 weeks after your starter goes down. Kirk tears his Achilles, season's over. That kind of is always going to be the case. So you don't really need to spend a whole bunch at the position to try to get the perfect. Yeah, if you get your Chase Daniel, you're very happy with that. But I'll put it this way. I think the backup playing the best in the league right now is Joe Flacco, and he was signed in like the middle of the season for nothing. So I don't think it's a matter of resource allocation at all. Get Quackin says, who would play at QB if the only goal was JJ yards? Definitely Nick Mullins. I mean, it's absolutely Nick Mullins. By the way, in terms of who is playing against the Lions, if you care, the Vikings have made that decision, but will not announce it. I think they will announce it today or Wednesday, with the priority being to tell the players first. So O'Connell watched the tape and said, we're going to go with this guy, but I'm not going to tell you guys yet because I want the players to be the first to know, which is just kind of, that's a nice courtesy, I guess, but we'll have to wait a couple days. Benjaby says, should the success of other division teams affect your strategy for the offseason? The Bears, Lions, and Packers are ascending. Is it more of a case to focus on rebuilding in the offseason? So first things first here, I guess. No, success of other division teams should not affect your strategy. If you're the Raiders, you shouldn't try to get Mahomes just because he's in the AFC West, right? Everybody should be trying to get Mahomes equally. But second thing, so all those teams are ascending, blah, blah, blah. I think expectation is playing into this perception a lot, right? The Vikings were a 13-4 team last year. If they didn't go 13-4 again, it's going to feel like they're getting worse. While all the other three teams were hot dookie in 2022. And the fact that they did a little better all feels like they're coming up. But ask yourself, would you be, are you happy with 7-9? Because that's what the Bears are. So are you really happy with that? They started their rebuild, quote unquote, the same time that the Vikings did, and 7-9. And if the Vikings were sitting in the 7 seed, ready to go travel to Dallas and get killed, would you really think that like that's where the team should be? Because that's where the Packers are. So like, I don't know if we were having the season that the Bears had or that the Packers had, the Vikings would be particularly happy with that, or Vikings fans would be particularly happy with that. The Lions, on the other hand, they're having a great season. So what can we learn from the Lions? Build with conviction, I think. They went with Jared Goff. They took all sorts of heat with it, and they said, nope, we are building around this guy. We are building a run-heavy team. We're building a Dan Campbell team, and we're going to be absolutely insane on fourth downs and with fake punts and stuff, and that's who we're going to be. And, to hell with everybody that doesn't agree. And I think that they are getting rewarded for that. It also helps to just nail the absolute crap out of a draft class. That's a really great way to take a team and turn them really good. So yes, the Vikings should do what the Lions did and absolutely home run a draft class and get like 4 starters out of it, just like they did in 2015. I have so many questions left. I'm just super not going to get to all of your questions, but I'll get to as many as I can coming up. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by PrizePicks. It's daily fantasy made easy. It's not your daddy's daily fantasy, though. It is just 2 to 6 of your favorite players. Can be the same position or whatever. And it's just you versus the house. You're not entering an entire pool and trying to put together the best lineup. It's just you versus the house. More than or less than on fantasy points or yards or touchdowns or whatever it is over on PrizePicks. We've been doing PrizePicks every Friday here on Locked On Vikings, having all kinds of fun with it. Now you can even combo them off. So you can combine, say, Justin Jefferson touchdowns with Anthony Edwards threes and put that together more than or less than whatever PrizePicks would project for that. So you can find all that at prizepicks.com or on the PrizePicks app, and you can go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL and use code LockedOnNFL for first deposit match up to $100. That's a first deposit match up to $100 just for going to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and using code LockedOnNFL. Moving right along with this Twitter Tuesday episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, I'm going to jam a whole bunch of questions together. A lot of people ask some version of what happened to the secondary. I'll read Jorge Dominguez's version. What happened to the secondary? Players like Evans and Metellus have played their worst games during this losing streak. I think some of it is just failing, just having some bad days. Sometimes you have a good day, sometimes you have a bad day. There doesn't need to be a pattern or a greater explanation to it. But the real John guy asks, was the ESPN article the beginning of the defense's problems? Seems like since then, Flores D has looked wide open. There's this interesting theory that I first saw from Arif Hassan, but I've been thinking about it too, that when Kevin Seifert posted that article about Brian Flores' defense and about kind of how Flores concocted it by talking to an assistant of Pat Narduzzi's at Pitt and taking those concepts, that was the information that teams needed to figure out what they were doing in coverage on the back end, because then they can just look at what Pat Narduzzi's defense does, which a lot of teams have guys that have worked for him, right? Everybody's familiar with. So like I was able to reverse engineer it, and I'm just a podcaster. Like teams might've been able to figure that out that way. That might've been the information. Now here's what I'll say. It's not like that's Seifert's fault, right? He's just doing his job. If you're that easy to figure out, that's on you. If it just takes one detail and the whole thing unravels, that's on you. But yeah, maybe that's an interesting way for that to like play out. But I wouldn't say Seifert owes nobody any apologies for what he wrote. That was a really cool piece and he should be proud of it. A quick one from Jeff L., who says, looks like the Vikings will finish third in the NFC North. The three standings-based opponents next year are looking like Giants, Jets, and Atlanta for third place, but I'm unclear who is third and who is fourth if the Bears and Vikings both finish at 7 and 10. So the Bears and Vikings are both at 7 and 9. So yeah, if they finish the same right now, the Vikings have third and the Bears have fourth. So it would stay that way. And that also means that the Bears draft a couple picks higher than the Vikings with their like natural pick. I think right now, as it stands, the Vikings are at 12th and the Bears are at 10th. And then they obviously have the first one via Carolina too. But yeah, Vikings will be third. So it's the third place scheduled. So that gives Giants, Jets, and Atlanta Falcons. Matt in Wisconsin asks, when you have 3 even-ish QBs, why not give each of them a one-drive script option and have them go in sequence? Consistency seems pretty much off the table at this point anyways. So love the idea. Would love to see someone try it. I think at the pro level, because everything is so dialed in and precise, you're not talking about, oh, we're going to be a little inconsistent. I think that's just untenable. You're just not going to have a great sense for the velocity and timing. And you need to approach a route differently depending on how Jaren Hall throws it versus how Nick Mullins throws it, just because of the difference in how those two guys drop back. Just that, right? Just because if they drop back, Nick Mullins' drop back is a little slower. So you have to break that much slower. And you maybe have to take a slightly longer step or a slightly shorter step. And that's all the stuff you just dial in over the course of camp. Call that chemistry. Having to change that stuff on the fly in the middle of a game all the time, kind of a nightmare. Like doing it once because one guy got hurt and the next guy goes in is one thing. Having to do it like drive to drive, you'd fall apart. Derek Morin asks, KOC and Kwesi have 2 years left on their contract. Even if it's the correct move, do they go full rebuild with their jobs on the line? They get a pass next year, no matter how it looks, if they decide to go that route. It's a moot point because the one thing that the Wilfs will not allow is like a full tank rebuild. They will not allow an unserious season. It's always been the thing. And everybody talks about like the Wilfs are meddling and they're being too hands-on as owners. They aren't getting into the day-to-day as far as I understand, but they do have a directive. And that directive is you must have a serious quarterback, or at least an attempt at a serious quarterback, and you must have an attempt at a serious season. No Sam Howelling, all right? There's no Sam Howells in this building. That's the directive. That's all we get. That doesn't necessarily mean that they can't be aggressive. That doesn't mean they aren't going to be allowed to be a rookie. That doesn't necessarily mean the Wilfs are even going to be that hands-on in the draft. They are in the war room. They always are in the war room. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be super pushy and Jerry Jones it, right? But yeah, they wouldn't do that. I will also say to your question, the contract doesn't matter. They'll renew, even like you can be on the hottest of hot seats. They still kind of won't let you coach in a contract year. It's just bad for business to do that for a bunch of reasons. But it's just like, here, just don't feel like you're proving it to other teams, like that's part of, they don't want it. They want you to feel at least loyal to it. They would much rather sign you to a 2-year deal and then immediately fire you, which is what happened with Jeff Fisher a few years ago. John Nebel asks, what were your hopes / expectations of this team 11 months ago? So for me, I think you can probably find receipts on this. I saw that the over-under on FanDuel was 8.5 wins, and I thought that was fair. I thought that was about, we were looking like a 500 team, and it looks like we about achieved that, of course, in a much different way. And you feel like, in the middle of October when they beat the 49ers and they were up 24-3 on the Packers, you're going, oh my God, this team might be a lot better than I thought. And then they fall apart and they get a bunch of injuries, but consistency was always the problem with this team. It happened to come about by injury and become a moot point. But if everybody stayed healthy, I, for one, would not have bet my life on them just keeping it up. We've never seen that, especially from Kirk. But yeah, I said 8.5 was a fair line. So 8 or 9 wins, I guess, was where I was at. Ken Lovin said, what position groups outside of QB do you think should be a priority to focus on this offseason? He says defensive line. I think absolutely. D tackle and defensive end. I mean, again, like the way I see the offseason, they don't have any defensive ends under contract right now. Maybe they will bring Danielle Hunter back, but like that is part of the priority, right? So D end is a huge priority, and just like pass rush in general. They just don't have dudes. Somebody asked about why they don't have a pass rush, because they don't have dudes. And yeah, guys are hurt, right? But like Jonathan Bullard does not rush the passer. Harrison Phillips does not like get pressure, right? They're not here for that. Schematically, they just need to push the pocket. So everything is on the edge rushers. And DJ Wanham just like wasn't that dude, right? There's only one guy, it's Danielle Hunter, and he's also walking. So yeah, pass rush is in like a critical DEFCON 1 situation. There are no players. That's one. Would love to get an extra corner, and then replacing the guys that leave, right? The quarterback, linebacker, even replacing like KJ Osborne, I would say, is a quote unquote starter as wide receiver 3. We're going to wrap this out with a couple from D's, who asks, no one can deny Hunter's a stud. However, would it be better to let him walk and use that money elsewhere since there are so many holes? Which holes, dude? Which ones? Because I don't think there's a worse hole than defensive end. So you're making the worst problem worse to get like a better tight end 3? Like, I don't know to what end. And this is where I get with like people say, oh, what if they traded Justin Jefferson and got 3 first-round picks and spent them on what? A wide receiver? You just got worse, dude. You're not going to just get a better wide receiver than Justin Jefferson. I know we did that with Diggs and JJ. That was lucky. That's not process. That was kind of getting bailed out of a bad situation by luck. And I think to a greater point when it comes to like a rebuild, right? You have to have someone to rebuild. Every resource that is earmarked to become a player, right? It's 10 million we're going to set aside. It becomes a tight end or whatever, is a chance for that to go belly up, right? For all of the really great signings you see, there's a lot of Charles, what was his name? Charles Omenihu? The edge rusher that signed like 3 gigantic deals for like the Dolphins and then the Jags and the Giants, and who was like bad in all those places. Like, that can always happen to you. And what the like rebuild argument always underestimates is the chance that you trade Justin Jefferson for 3 draft picks and then whiff those picks. Would you really trade Justin Jefferson for like Laquan Treadwell, Mike Hughes, and Sam Bradford? Because that was 3 years of first round picks. No, you would not do that, right? Would you trade JJ for 3 JJs? Yeah, you would. So what are the odds? What are the probabilities? What's the value? It's never, ever, ever going to be better return on investment than just investing in a guy you already know is good and you want to build the organization around. The organization should be built around Justin Jefferson. Any plan that doesn't build the organization around Justin Jefferson, to me, is worse than a plan. Like a version of the Vikings built around Justin Jefferson, however you build to it, is a better idea than a version of the Vikings built not around Justin Jefferson. Because now who's your guy? TBD draft pick? Better hope you hit on him. Otherwise, you look like an absolute idiot. Dee's also asked, John Croft floated the idea of going full rebuild by letting Kirk walk and trading JJ. Is the latter idea insane? Okay, yeah, I kind of answered those two at the same time. Letting Kirk walk, not necessarily insane, because the answer to how do you replace him has a lot of viable, interesting ideas, right? Let's talk about Kyler Murray. Let's talk about all these draft guys, right? Michael Penix looked great in the playoff. What do we want to do? There's a lot of at least debatable ideas that are interesting. You might not like them, but we can talk about them, and they're at least within the realm of reason, right? We can agree and disagree on them and debate them. It's not really debatable to be like, what if we like traded away Justin Jefferson and replaced him with like a second rounder like Jonathan Mingo? It's like, no, you're just sort of peeing away value. I don't really get it. To what end? What's the plan? I'll cut it off there. I'm probably long. My voice hurts a lot, so I'm going to hope that podcasting doesn't hurt as much going into the future, both emotionally and physically. I'll see y'all tomorrow, and as always, Skol.